So welcome, everyone. Of course, it really is a pleasure to be at the IMC, a very important conference for us all. In our presentation today, I've got a lovely team, and we'll get on to introductions. How much is too much? Understanding the right amount of information to deliver to visually impaired people when on the move for the ultimate mobility. So in this presentation, we'll kick off with a team introduction. We'll then move into the requirements of visually impaired mobility. So what are the fundamental principles on which we design products on and research on? Then how these requirements have been addressed in electronic orientation aids and electronic travel aids, and then the creation of a new substance of mobility aid, which is the binary electronic mobility system, the BEMS. And then, of course, the WeWALK Smart Cane and how our device has addressed these previous requirements and this whole new product category. We'll then touch off with our design and how we've taken each of these individual pieces of research and findings into our final product, and then the future. So as a team, I'll start off. I'm Jean-Marc. I'm WeWALK's head of research and development, and I look after the development of our product and also how we address our often complex user requirements. I'm also a PhD researcher at Imperial College London, looking at the mobility of visually impaired individuals. And I'm very fortunate to be joined with my colleague and partner, Gökhan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gökhan. I'm one of the co-founders of WeWALK team and responsible for our international growth. So we are based in London, and we have the pleasure to share the presentation with our colleagues. Over to you, Dr. Brostek Lee.
Good morning from Kentucky. My name is Donna Brostek Lee. I'm a clinical associate professor at the University of Kentucky with the Visual Impairment Program. I'm pleased to have my colleague here with me. I will let him introduce himself.
I'm Justin Kaiser, a clinical assistant professor at University of Kentucky, also teaching in our TBI and O&M programs. And Bill?
Good morning. I'm William Penrod from Northern Illinois University, and I work and teach primarily in our visual disabilities program, which includes orientation mobility, VRT, and orientation mobility, and now CADIS, but I don't have anything to do with CADIS.
Indeed, we have quite a wonderful team on this presentation. So let's kick off with the requirements of visually impaired mobility. And of course, to do that, we need to understand visual impairment at its very core. Now, of course, visual impairment is a disability as described by the Equality Act here in the UK, which leads to manifestations in sight and what we perceive and our visual memory. And as a result of a reduction in sight, that naturally hinders our ability of understanding the environment around us. Being visually impaired myself, this is something which affects me very personally. And as a result, we have a reduced understanding of the environment around us, and as a result, a susceptibility to high risk when mobilizing. But there's also something called accessibility and usability, and something that's not often known is that accessibility is actually a composite of two things. Accessibility doesn't just define an ability to access an environment, it also is formed of the environment itself. So what are the user's abilities, and what does the environment then provide to the user in order for them to fulfill that ability? And that this shouldn't be confused with usability. Now, in product development, usability describes the effectiveness of a product or a service or an environment, whatever it may be, and allowing a user to achieve their goals, not just the effectiveness of a product in delivering information, but how it delivers that information to the user. So when we talk about the right amount of information delivery, we're not talking about the accessibility of information, but how usable is that information in actually allowing the user to achieve what they want to achieve. And in our context, that's mobility. And again, it's also important to make the distinction between visual function and functional vision. So visual function at its very core is what the organ and the human body allows you to see and perceive. It's something which, as mobility tool creators, as ETA and EOA creators, we cannot necessarily affect visual function. This is something which we must adapt to. The information we provide must adapt to the visual function, which we understand from our, individuals, from the people we design our products for. And this pertains to contrast sensitivity, visual field, visual acuity, glare and disability glare. There are loads of ways to measure visual function. Where we really come in information delivery is in that middle stage, that critical middle stage, where we translate visual function into something which is usable, into something which translates to real world practicality. Can the user seek employment? Can they walk to the store and purchase items to allow them to carry out activities of daily living? And this is where we must realize that we must input visual function and the user's capacity. We must output and measure functional vision and how our products and the information we deliver actually meets and changes the user's existing functional vision. Now, here is a matrix of requirements that I derived within my PhD, which shows that visually impaired people have a range of different capacities and parameters. It's not just a simple case of reduced visual function equals reduced environment. In fact, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware on the call or are mobility experts, visually impaired people don't often regulate their walking speed based on visual function. Rather, it is regulated based on the confidence of the individual and their cognitive processes occurring within the specific environment they're navigating in. So how does cognitive load change? And yes, of course, visual function is a parameter within that function, but it's not the only function. So information delivery doesn't just look at visual function. It looks at the short-term and long-term cognitive state of the individual. It looks at explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Does the individual know the environment in which they're operating in? And of course, is the individual operating on their own, or are they operating within a crowd? Is another human assisting them? All very important considerations when we design products. And what we realize is when looking at the two sort of key pain points of visually impaired individuals, we have two things we must account for: obstacle and hazard awareness and wayfinding. You might almost say, as a bit of a teaser, these kind of correlate with the end goals of an EOA, which is to give you wayfinding and help you orientate yourself, and an ETA, which helps you determine obstacles and hazards. So it's funny how those two sort of pain points actually elude and correspond to the two categories of technology which people develop today. And therefore, at the lowest level, we can then ask ourselves, does the information we provide the visually impaired person, does it consider their visual function at the very base? Does it also consider the extent of the user's knowledge? So if the user is familiar with the train station, should we be always giving them that information about trains? Or should we allow them to breathe and focus on their own O&M? Does the user present any other physiological impairments? For instance, is navigating stairs and escalators an issue? So does our information system consider that? And of course, does it consider congestion? Because congestion can have a huge fear on mobility operating within a big crowd. We've shown that that actually has a fear in mobility. And also, is the user relying on other tech and tools? One of the biggest pain points we found is that whilst holding a smartphone and navigating a cane, users are under extraordinary cognitive load, often trying to jump between different mobile interfaces and different apps, while also applying the O&M techniques that they are traditionally taught. O&M techniques don't often account for the smartphone and the plethora of different apps which keep getting updated. So that's another important consideration in information delivery. And of course, it's not just about delivering the information, it's also about making sure the user can then interrogate the system to get the information that they need when they need it. And this is called an intermediary check on progress, an ICOP. So again, that's a super important thing, reassuring the user that they're actually heading on the right path, not just telling them what the right path is, but regularly reassuring them that, hey, you're going in the right direction. So I'm now going to pass on to the rest of the team who are going to talk to you about how ETAs and EOAs have existed for the past few years.
Hello, so this is Donna Lee. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the classes of mobility systems, and we really have 5 of these. The most traditional one most of us are familiar with is the long cane. We also have dog guides and human guides. But what we're going to talk to you a little bit about today is the electronic travel aid, the ETA, or the electronic orientation aid, the EOA. So what is an ETA? By definition, this is a device that emits energy waves to detect the environmental information within a certain range. It processes reflected waves and provides the user with feedback detecting drop-offs. It provides environmental preview, as well as it can also provide overhead protection. And we saw some of that demonstrated in the session just before ours here. There are 2 primary categories of ETA. Now, one thing to know, these were originally introduced in 1996, and there were 4 categories. But going back and looking, we felt they were rather confusing, so they were refined in 2010 to a primary and secondary device. A primary device does not require the use of any other mobility system to ensure this user's safety. So this is something they use on their own as a individual device. A secondary ETA, it has to be used in conjunction with something else. This is typically the long cane, a dog guide, or it could even be used with a human guide to ensure the safety. Some examples of these are the primary device are the Neuron laser cane, which is now considered a historic device. It's not available anymore. And the other is the Ultra cane, which is still available right now. Again, what makes it a primary device, and that's the picture is here on the slide, is that the cane and the system are together in the same unit. So they're not using something additional. Secondary devices are Sonic Guide, the Lindsay Russell Path Sounder, the Mowat sensor, and current ones would be the Mini Guide and the Mini Guide US, which is the bottom picture in this slide. That's used again with something else. So they're going to use their cane or their dog or human guide, as well as the case sonar, which leads us to EOAs, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Justin Kaiser.
Yes, so electronic orientation aids was a term developed in 2010 to differentiate from what electronic travel aids do. And EOAs are used more for orientation and navigation enhancement, but it's not detecting a clear path or kind of obstacle detection. And looking at the history of these devices, the Trekker Breeze was one of the most commonly used, and this technology developed into smartphone apps such as Nearby Explorer, Blind Square, Ariadne GPS, and Seeing Eye GPS. So up until now, it was often a user's choice. They had deciding between an ETA or EOA, and technically someone could use a long cane or dog guide in conjunction with one of those devices, but it's often difficult to manage both systems simultaneously. And that's why we're talking about the binary electronic mobility system, or the BEMS, combining these two systems to offer path preview, drop off, and overhead protection while also using it as a navigation device. And that brings us to the BEMS.
All right, can I take it from here, Justin?
Yep.
The binary electronic mobility device is or system is a new term you probably aren't aware of, because we just brought it out in the new started using this term in the new Red Book, Foundations of Orientation and Mobility. And it's it's going to be the 4th edition that comes out. The 3rd edition, we introduced electronic orientation aids because we need further clarification at that time. But now we've got this new category of binary electronic mobility system, acronym BEMS, which actually provides all the attributes of a primary mobility system, mobility device, meaning a cane, something to safely, something that will effectively detect and preview the environment or the path being followed, along with electronic orientation provided by GPS and GIS. It's all in one system with the combination of the smartphones with this particular category device. The user has all in one hand the information necessary to travel safely, efficiently, and without incident. Now I'll turn it over to Jean-Marc.
Yep, thanks, Bill. And indeed, it is this fusion of these two separate pain points that we believe could cause a significant reduction in the cognitive load presented to a visually impaired individual when trying to navigate today's often very complex environments that often require a lot of orientation, trying to find the bus, trying to find timetables, businesses, and stores around you. And an example of a binary electronic mobility system is the WeWALK Smart Cane, one which we're very proud and fortunate to be developing based on this research. And it very much so is something which came from lived experience. You never underestimate the power of your own experiences in developing a product, because with this lived experience, we realized that whilst technology very much so is a way forward for visually impaired people, limiting and understanding the type of technology we offer and ensuring it doesn't interfere with existing orientation and mobility practice is just as important. And our approach is to take the standard white cane, one which we've relied on, well, since forever, a crucial tool within our orientation and mobility, but to add a bunch of features to address the pain points created by today's modern environments, and to also eliminate the new pain point, which is holding a smartphone in one hand, something which is not classically considered under orientation and mobility training. So by eliminating the smartphone and bringing a touchpad and an obstacle detection sensor to the cane itself, users can actually change and navigate through different environments, getting turn-by-turn guidance straight from their cane whilst keeping their smartphone in their pockets. And the idea is, well, just like smartphones, things always evolve. Today's modern ETAs and EOAs need to adapt to changing technologies, chip sizes, new communication standards. And so with WeWALK, we've realized that we have to stay relevant. We have to, be connected to APIs, to transport APIs, to routing APIs, to ensure we're providing good information and quality of information. And that's why by maintaining smartphone connectivity but not eliminating it, we're actually able to do so and deliver cloud-based updates. And here's the WeWALK app itself. Again, we cannot eliminate the smartphone. But again, another pain point we found was users typically jump between so many different applications. So by bringing public transport and navigation under one roof, under an accessible interface, mind you, an interface which is easy to scroll, that's another pain point. You can't be scrolling around when walking around. And also maintaining a good low vision interface for users with some remaining sight, that we can deliver a better experience than a completely standalone tool. And the vision for this is that we want to bring all these different technologies, all these different segregated mobility systems under one roof, one device that includes smart city navigation, the best ETA features, the best EOA features, as well as something which can evolve to suit new environments that haven't been explored before, like indoor navigation. And this very much is driven through research with our partner organizations. And I'll pass this on to Gökhan to tell you how we're validating the work we do with the organizations that we work with.
Indeed, Jean-Marc. So we are very fortunate to work with organizations around the world, and with the help of them, so we are identifying the right necessities and we are focusing on them. For example, Robin Spinks from RNIB or Bashir Ibrahim from Vision Australia. So they know the needs and they guide us, like our colleagues in this presentation, to develop the best and the most effective system for the visually impaired people.
Indeed. So let's actually show you the system. And one thing we're very proud about is the app is currently available to download. It's something which we recommend just trying out because the proof is always in the pudding, actually using the app to navigate. And one of the main sticking points for us is an accessible interface. There's no point in delivering loads and masses of high-end information if the user can't even access it from the very core. And so we've designed our app with color filters and text sizes, a best practice which other applications should really aim to do. We then realized that public transit systems are actually quite challenging because different operators tend to have different applications, and you often cannot ensure the accessibility of these different applications. So by taking and integrating with Microsoft Azure API, a really great API and a partner organization of ours, we're able to present a bunch of different transport operators as well as the vehicle serving each stop under one interface. So users don't have to switch applications. Again, something which could cause a lot of cognitive load. And finally, a pain point with public transport is actually getting off at the right stop. Again, some buses might use visual cues, some bus operators might use auditory cues, but often it's difficult to assess whether a bus will have the right accessible cue for you. So by building this into the app at its very foundation, users can be sure that whatever bus they get on and board off will have the right amount of information to help them all get off at the right stop. Navigation, again, was another pain point we found, and we looked at other solutions to see how we can best combine different practices. And we found that a combination of clock directions, low vision mapping, and a two-way direction system was actually very useful. So our navigation system not only provides users with a map and clock directions, but the way in which we instruct users is different. We provide one instruction, which is how the user should travel on the current street that they're on, so head straight, for instance, and then a second instruction to indicate a node, a turning point, or an action point, so something that the user must do. Therefore, we are reassuring the user and allowing them to interrogate the system, but also informing them and preparing them for any actions that might be upcoming, allowing the user to visualize the route And then we realized we can't stop there. We have to combine public transit and walking because as humans, we're not walking every single journey. We have to be able to understand what transit options are around us. But what's more important is, not only must we assume that a transit option is around us, we must categorize the priority of that transit information. So is it a primary piece of information? Do we need this information to conduct the journey? Is it a secondary or a tertiary piece of information? Is this information necessary to the journey, or is it just something which is good to know for better global spatial orientation as opposed to microscopic spatial orientation? And that's why we've combined our walking and our public transit into a single application, again, simplifying the experience for users and only providing the information that is so required. And then exploration. So we also realized that users want to find out about places nearby, especially with an automated exploration mode. So in a mode that tells users what's around them without them having to actively select a store that's around them. But again, that actually posed a new challenge. Often what we found is by overloading the user with spatial orientation information around them about nearby shops, whilst also trying to provide navigation, that again leads to a substantial cognitive overload and the user just being completely disorientated. They get a bunch of different cloak directions and a bunch of different distances, and you're just not quite sure what to do. And so with our exploration mode, we've allowed the user to set how often they are reminded of nearby places, allowing them to turn on and off the option even when they're navigating. Again, an important practice which we would hope other researchers and app developers would adopt. And we've been fortunate to receive some awards to validate the work that we've been doing, including a Time Best Invention of 2019, an Edison Gold Award, and an honorable mention by Fast Company, which shows that combining ETAs and EOAs into a single device really might be the way of the future. Now, what lies ahead? So with WeWALK, we realized that as with previous ETAs and EOAs, there has to be a long-term vision. We can't just make a device which might be obsolete in 2 to 3 years. We must make a dependable device with a long-term cycle that visually impaired users and their mobility trainers can get used to, a device which stays within a standard. And so, well, we're working with mobility trainers to make WeWALK a more useful orientation and mobility aid. So in partnership with Microsoft, we're using WeWALK's built-in sensors, the gyroscope and the accelerometer, to find out how visually impaired people are moving, looking at things like preferred walking speed and PPWS under inefficient environments, the user's pass efficiency, the user's walking speed, and the amount of time that the user is spending outdoors. So not only are we just providing a mobility tool, but we're actually using that tool, as mentioned previously, to measure the user's functional vision. So are we actually having a positive impact with our tool? And this feature will be released soon, and we're very excited to be testing this with orientation and mobility officers to make sure that we're actually having a long-term and sustainable impact on our users. So that's all from us. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and found it informative. We're open to questions and answers now.